answer any questions that you might have. I've already done one workshop during the week and it took me about an hour and 20 minutes, so I expect that will be sort of the formal component, and then, as I said, there'll be time for questions. Now, this really is my opportunity to pretty much start the assignment with you, and I'm going to go through not everything, but quite a lot of the assignment. Now, in terms of just things I do on the document camera, you'll probably want to take notes of. When it comes to the Excel, you'll probably want to maybe just focus on drawing some kind of like diagram to describe what it is I'm producing, rather than trying to write down all the steps. It's better that you see what I'm ending up with so that you know what you're aiming for, because you can always come back to consultation sessions if you get stuck with the steps. And of course we do have all those recordings that show how to do different sorts of things, pivot tables, charts, from the lectures as recordings on Blackboard, so you can watch all of my lecture demo. And if you follow this structure and sort of fill in each of my bullet points, you'll end up with a paragraph for your introduction, and it will certainly be a good start to the report. So whenever I write a report, and specifically the introduction, I always like to begin with an intro sentence. It doesn't really have to specifically relate to the final analysis that you're going to do, but it just introduces the topic generally. It sets the scene, it gets the reader thinking about why credit cards might be an interesting topic. So you can sort of, put something that's of current interest, you can put something in that's historical, just something very general, nothing specifically to do with data analysis, just something general about credit cards to make sure everyone knows it's an interesting topic right from the beginning. Once you've done that, you can start thinking about the sort of things that are going to go into the report and give the reader an idea about what's to come. And a good place to start is with the aim or objective. Now, it's important to keep in mind that I know there's a lot of information in that task sheet, but nowhere did I ask you to pick the best credit card. You're not recommending a credit card. The machinery goes crazy on weekends. You're not recommending a credit card. You're doing a review, and that review is both historical and current. So you're looking at debt levels and availability of credit historically, and then you're having a look at the current market to see what's happening with interest rates and the types of factors that may influence them. So make sure that it is very clear from early in the introduction that this is a review style report. You're trying to provide a summary of what's going on, current and historical. It's not a report where you're going to come up with a recommendation at the end. You're going to have conclusions, but you're not choosing a product. Now, it's important to realise that, because that does set the tone of your report. Now, once you've got that out of the way, it's always nice in a data analysis-based report to also, in the introduction, make reference to the actual data that you're going to be using. So it might be that you just expand a little bit more on the idea that there is both historical and current data. You may want to include reference to where the data comes from and mention some of the variables. You may want to go down to the level of actually specifying, say, how many credit cards are in our current sample. The level of detail you go into is somewhat up to you, because there will be an opportunity later in the report to provide more specific information about the data set. But it is nice just to clarify the data from the beginning, so you can sort of think about how much information you want to give, but do include something. And just finish off that introductory paragraph by having some kind of indication as to what's to come in the report. Now, if you've listened to my recordings, part 1 and part 2, and I hope everyone has by this stage, you'll know that my recommended structure is to do the historical and then the current in that order, but it certainly is still up to you. It could work the other way. I just like to remind people that, again, you've got to think about the overall flow of the report, how it's going to read, and so it is nice to have some kind of idea, even from the introduction, as to what's to come, the sort of path that you're going to be taking down. So if you are going to use my recommended approach of historical first, then moving into the current, you can make some reference to the fact that you know there's going to be that initial exploration of what's been happening over the last several decades, and then there'll be that focus on the current market situation. So if you follow that advice, yes, you still have to come up with your own sentences, but that's a good standard type introduction to put in a report like this. One paragraph and you're on your way. Okay. Oh, and just, I mean, in terms of report writing generally, you need to think about what's going to work best for you. Years ago, I used to be one of those people that had to write everything down on paper before I typed it up. Now I'm very much, I just like to start typing. I always like to say to people, if you haven't got a lot of experience writing reports, probably the most important advice I can give you is, as you think of useful things to say, even if it's just a few words or a particular word that you think might fit in nicely, jot it down. Have just some temporary bullet points in your Word file. As soon as you think of something you might like to say, type it in, even if it's not polished. It's much easier to tidy up something that's on the screen than it is to just come up with your report when the screen is blank. So don't think it has to be perfect from the beginning. Jot down your ideas. Quite often I sort of, as soon as everything pops into my head, I type it in. It might be that I use that word later on in the report, but I have everything there. You can drag it around, you can improve on it, but get something down. Don't leave that actual writing step until the end. Now, in terms of where you go from the introduction, I've recommended that the next section relate to outliers. Now, it's only going to be a small section of the report, and certainly in my recordings, I do spend longer on that subsection talking about how to set it up. So to start with a sort of sentence on why outliers need to be considered, the fact that they can distort analysis, and that you need to consider them specifically for the interest rate data that will be analysed as part of the current market review. So you still have that sort of intro sentence setting the scene. You're going to show some calculations to make sure that you've done it correctly, but you're just going to put some example calculations in an appendix. Excel's going to do the work for you, so the appendix is really for our benefit, just to make sure you've done the right thing. And then back in the body of the report, you'll say whether you found any outliers, and if you don't find any, well then you don't have to do anything, your data set stays as it is. If you did find outliers, you'd have to decide whether you're going to leave them in or take them out. Now we're going to do that today, so you'll soon know the answer to that, but just keep in mind that that will be a fairly small section. It could be left until just the beginning of the current market review, but I like to have it nice and early in a report, straight after the introduction, just so that I've sort of finalised my data set. Because if you do have outliers, this is sort of part of our preliminary analysis of the data. It's not helping us with any of our specific goals, it's just to tidy the data, make sure that the data set we've got is the final one we're going to analyse. So I think if you put it in straight after the introduction, it just gets that out of the way, and then you're ready to go on to the full analysis. So let's have a look. It all, of course, revolves around using Z-scores. We learnt in the lectures that if you work out your Z-score and it's more than 3 or less